Hello and welcome to my channel, Haylee Marie Vintage. Today I'm really excited. We have a collaboration. I have been wanting to do more collaborations on my channel, and sometimes I just find it challenging with the way I film and schedule and all of this. So I really love these open collaborations. So this is my project that is a part of the hashtag Shirtwaist September. Shirtwaist September originated with Serena and Ashley. I'll link both their channels down below, who got together and were kind of talking about how there's people who say that like shirtwaists only look good on some people. So this is like to talk about like shirtwaist can look good on anyone. Shirtwaist also means a lot of different things. Before I kicked off this video, I actually looked up the definition of shirtwaist, and a shirtwaist is essentially any women's dress that mimics the look of a menswear button-up and steals elements from that. So it's actually really open-ended on what a shirtwaist even is, which I think is actually really fun. We're doing a shirtwaist here on this channel. So as with any open collaboration, I will have like all the info down below. I'll put a little graphic up here that tells you a little bit more info about how you can participate. This is open to anybody. I really hope we get a similar energy as the walkaway dress challenge, because I feel like that was a really fun way to see a lot of different people with a lot of different styles make something along the same lines, and I think that's always really fun. So the shirtwaist I'm gonna make is from 1951. It is this pattern here, which is a little like dress that kind of brings in like a tuxedo element with like some pintucks and things, and I think will be really cute. The official description is flattering details on this one-piece dress. Bodice has a tucked button front, bib yoke with a perky collar, 4-piece dirndlish skirt, and then there's the option of like contrast yoke, short sleeve, long sleeve, sleeveless, all that stuff. I will likely go sleeveless because I find in general, I don't know, but short sleeves could be really cute. I don't know what I'm gonna do sleeve-wise yet. I'm gonna probably start to cut out fabric and then decide, which is maybe not the most organized, but I go like back and forth on whether I prefer my dresses to have sleeves or not, because there's something really nice about having something you can put a sweater over, but there's also something nice about having everything built in. So I haven't decided on that yet. But yeah, I think this pattern's really fun. Play it on a shirtwaist, so I think it'll be really fun to make up. For the fabric, I'm going to go pretty plain for me. So my thought with this is I want to kind of mimic the feel of a garment I actually had to declutter a few years ago just due to it becoming too small for me to wear. I'll put an image of it somewhere over here. And to do that, I am bringing in this here, which is a nice like linen kind of mottled teal fabric. And then I'm going to, I think, do the bib area with just a piece of white fabric from my stash. And then the last detail, because if you know me, you know this is like a pretty plain style for me. I have some lace embroidery. I don't know, I have some teal floral things that I picked up. That's like a lace that I think will look really good on this fabric that I'm going to add into making this dress, and I think it will turn out super cute. And I'm pretty excited about it. I don't know how long this project will take me. This is a pretty straightforward dress except for the collar area. So I think we'll just kind of see how it goes. The plan is today I'm gonna cut out my fabric, get everything prepped and ready to go, and then tomorrow I have a day filled with fun and events, so I don't have the ability to sew tomorrow. I'm hoping to kind of be able to make this in one day on Sunday, but we'll kind of see. My chronic pain health stuff has still been a little bit weird, so things have just been taking longer than expected. So I'm just kind of gonna just feel out how this project goes, see what happens. I ultimately don't sew if I don't feel good about my body recovering from sewing, because I do work a full-time job. I can't put my body over the edge to sew and have to take time off work. Also, I just like think in general we shouldn't be pushing our bodies to that type of edge. So with all that, we're just gonna hop into it and we're gonna just see how long this takes and how it goes. I am starting by, of course, cutting out the pattern on the fabric. So what you can see in these pieces laid out here is I have shortened both the skirt pieces by about 3 inches and then the bodice pieces by about a 1/2 inch. I just did this based on some adjustments I've been wanting to make on other patterns from around this decade. Generally, they're just a smidge long in the waist for me, and then I end up cutting anywhere between 3 and 4 inches off the bottom. So I'm trying to get ahead of it here and not have to worry about it. And of course, Spooky, like always, is lurking. She's just sitting there on that extra bit of fabric that I'm not going to use, which is perfect because I actually have another project I really want to use this fabric for, to make something I saw a brand selling that I wanted. So I'm pretty excited to have a little bit left over here. And then this is your reminder that I do have both a Patreon and a Ko-fi where you can go over and do a monthly membership and get access to all my videos a few days early. In general, I make negative 84 cents an hour running this channel, so anybody who wants to support me over there is greatly appreciated. I also needed some white fabric, so I grabbed the leftovers of a pillowcase I used in a recent video to cut out the white fabric that I needed. This works great, and this fabric is always pretty high quality, so 10 out of 10. It was really cheap, and it was also a great way for me to use up some of those pillowcase bodies that I don't usually use in my linen upcycles. And the last thing I cut out was a little bit of interfacing for the neck stand and the collar. Nowhere in the pattern does it mention putting in interfacing. This is just my best guess using the knowledge that I have. So the first thing to do is to pin tuck on all these lines where the bib is going to be before you even cut out the bib really. So I am first pressing the line really firmly, and then the instructions say to sew 1/16 from the edge. I did my best, but I think realistically I end up at 1/8 because 1/16 is wild. And then I'm pressing everything to lay in the same direction before starting the process all over again. And then with the pintucked, I guess, I am going to cut out the official bib pattern. It makes sense that they have you pin tuck this and then cut the pattern because, like, for example, the fact that I realistically probably sewed 1/8 of an inch instead of 1/16 could alter the pattern in a really negative way. So it makes sense to make the pin tucking first and then to cut the pattern out after. From there, I'm making sure things get pressed on the folds. And then it has you top stitch on the edge of the fold similarly to the way you would do it on the pin tucks, but of course you don't iron this to like stick up or anything. And then after that, I'm also going to do the 1/4 inch sewing down the raw edge of the like interfacing flap situation that happens when you make these. And then before I take a break for lunch, I thought it was good time for a button sort. I'm just trying to figure out exactly what buttons I want to use for this project. I have, as always, so many options. And after a long search, I chose these little white glass buttons with a gold rim. And from there, I went ahead and I put in the buttonholes. These are pretty small buttonholes since the buttons are pretty tiny. And then I'm just pinning the pieces together of the front of the bib to make sure they'll be ready to sew in as one piece. Now I get to pivot to the teal part of the bodice. And the first thing I'm going to do here is add in the darts. And then I am pinning the front of the bodice together. And for this project, my seam finishing of choice is to use my pinking shears. From here, what I'm doing is I am sewing that 5/8 of an inch all the way around the neckline. This will help me know where my fold line is for the eventual like sewing it down. Which is what you see here when my hair isn't in the way, is I am folding this over to that stitching line that I just made, and also having that stitching line allows me to know exactly how far in I can clip corners and things like that. So this is a really useful step that I used to skip, but I don't really recommend skipping anymore because I definitely feel like I get a cleaner edge in a project like this than if I skip this step and just kind of try to fold everything over with my iron. And then I'm using my usual top stitching pinning method where I am first pinning from the back to make sure the seam allowances add up and I'm not like taking any inches out of the, I guess you could call it the dicky part, before then flipping it over and putting the pins in the top and pulling the pins out of the bottom. And then off camera, I'm going to do a top stitch as close to the edge as possible before I'm then going to go around that edge and pink it so that way it's a finished edge. And then I'm going to actually do a second row of stitching about, I think it told me 5/8 away, but I ended up doing 3/8. The instructions tell you to do 2 rows of top stitching. I don't super love the method of doing 2 rows of top stitching, but since I'm going to have some trim covering it, I was fine with that. And then later that afternoon, I went over to a friend's house to watch some Great British Sewing Bee together, and I did the hand stitching of the trim I'm adding around the neckline of the bodice front. With picking this up the next day, I am going to start focusing on the back, which is, instead of darts, making these little tucks, which I actually kind of prefer in the back. I like how these tucks look, and I feel like they give more space for like your shoulders to move around and do things. And the instructions just tell you to top stitch these tucks, which is not usually how I do this, but I don't mind following the instructions for it. I would usually probably baste these tucks across and then sew them in like with the waistband and all of that stuff, and not actually have these like top stitch tucks. I think top stitch tucks are not the cutest for me personally. With the front and back pieces being all prepped, I am now going to focus on starting the collar. In this case, I have just put the two pieces together with the interfacing, and I'm going around the edge with the appropriate seam allowance. From there, I am going to be clipping my corners, clipping my curves, and getting a nice neat press from the outside. And then for the stand-in collar, the pattern tells you to turn up the bottom edge of one side, I guess probably what, the full 5/8 of an inch, so that's what I'm doing here. It made me realize how skinny these guys are gonna be. I think this is actually my first time working with a stand collar with this kind of like third piece in the middle between it and like the blouse, or the bodice in this case. But then the next thing that I'm doing is I'm pinning the collar piece to the right side of that upper neckband, and then I am going to be pinning the top layer of the neckband as well, so that way we have like a little collar neckband sandwich. From the sandwich method, I am now pulling that out and making sure everything is pressed and looking really nice, and then I am pinning the collar part right side to wrong side, I believe, wrong side of bodice, right side of the neckline, because eventually I'm going to top stitch the neckband from the outside, or like the right side of the bodice. Hopefully guiding you through this is making sense. This was kind of a confusing and new process for me, but here you can now see me doing the top stitching of the band to the outside of the bodice, which you can tell it's the outside because of the pintucks you see flying by. And then this encloses all of those seams that happen all into one little neckband, instead of kind of having to tuck them and put them into the collar. So I think this is a really nice method. It obviously doesn't make sense in all cases, but I think it worked really well for this. And with the collar done, I can now sew up these side seams on the bodice. And then I am going to be pinking those seams again. And it seemed like now was as good a time as any to sew those buttons onto the bodice. Now I'm getting started on my focus on the sleeves. The first thing I'm doing is pressing them where the hemline for these sleeves should be. This is one of those patterns that has kind of those weird angled sleeve hem things, so I wanted to get a clear mark in before then pinning the sleeve together to sew it up into, you know, the circular sleeve shape, or I guess tube, that we're all familiar with. And then once that sleeve is sewn up, I'm going to finish that edge of that hem. That way I don't have to worry about like adding an additional line of pressing to hold the whole thing together. I like to just have a line of stitching there, even though it's not really usually what all of these instructions demand. Usually it seems like they just want everything pressed, but I like the securing of a stitching line so I don't have to make sure that things aren't poking up where they shouldn't be. And from there, I'm going to press up the hem back where it came from, and then I'm going to just quickly hand sew and slip stitch these hems in. And then off camera, I put in some gathering stitches. So this pattern was very specific in how it has you ease in these sleeves, and this method actually worked well for me, so there's a chance I'll use it again. So it had you sew a basting stitch 1/8 away from the edge of the sleeve, like the sleeve head, and then you just like gather and ease it in, and it specifically says to put a pin every 1/2 inch. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm pretty determined that today's the day I'm going to finally set my first sleeve, not counting knits, that has no wrinkles or bumps but is just a beautifully perfectly set sleeve. So I am going very carefully along, easing everything, and then the pattern again explicitly stated to sew this seam with the bodice side, or like the flat side up. So again, I'm following that. Usually I like to turn it around if I'm trying to get no creases, but I thought I'd trust the pattern and try it out because the 1/8 inch basting line worked really well for me and was a method I hadn't tried before. As I suspected, with that method I did get quite a few little tucks, and by quite a few I mean just like 3 per sleeve. So I picked those stitches out and like repinned and did all that good stuff, and then I sewed that line again, and this time I sewed it from the like wrinkly sleeve side to try to make sure I'm not getting any new tucks, and that worked, and I did indeed accomplish my goals of sleeves eased in with 0 tucks. It definitely takes a lot of fastidiousness and time, but you can do it, and it's not that hard. It's just kind of time consuming. From there, I'm going to put in some rayon seam binding to bind my armpit sleeves. And because I already know this fabric's a little bit on the thick side for the rayon seam binding to work well, I sewed my line and then I trimmed it down so there's only about like a 1/4 inch left, and then that will reduce the bulk enough that it's easy enough for me to then fold that over and sew that seam so everything is nice and enclosed in the seam binding. And now I'm going to move my attention onto the skirt. First steps here is I have sewn in the pocket, and I am now just finishing that little bit of pocket seam before pressing it open. This is an easy thing to like skip finishing, but I do think it makes a difference in the final product if you finish this seam. From there, I am pinning the side seams of this skirt together. I do want to note I've already sewn up the front seam, and then the back seam I'm going to leave fully open. And with the skirt all sewed and seamed and ready to go, I put in my gathering stitches up at the top. This is my usual 2 rows. This one I actually ended up using 4.5mm long stitches, but often I use a 4 on this so I can get the gathers a little tighter. But I knew because of the era that this was going to be a looser gather anyway, so 4.5 or even 5 would have been perfectly appropriate. And from there, I am going to finish this seam in the exact same method as the sleeve seam, except for this, of course, has even more bulk and more gather. So first I am sewing on that seam binding, then I am again trimming down that seam bulk. That way I can fold over the tape and finish the edge here with something really clean. And then here, the biggest reason that I like to now just leave the whole back seam open is what it allows me to do is actually figure out the proper size of my zipper and get a little bit more of an accurate read, because I don't have to do the math for how much the waistline takes in, because usually that's like a little over an inch. So I've done that, and then I will sew the bottom part with the usual stitches before I will then increase to a basting length, which is 5 for me. I put it up as high as possible because I want to unpick things as easy as possible, and then also that seam the rest of the way up and press it open and then pull out those stitches so I can input the zipper, which is exactly what I'm doing here. I was pretty pleased to have a zipper that was a decent match in my stash. My zipper stash has been getting, I don't want to say low, but low of the colors that I will use the most, so I'm gonna need to go hunt down some zipper lots again. I'm just gonna sew the first seam down and around and then match up the other side of the seam and key points to try to keep the zipper pretty even. That's just the way I do things. Zippers are one of those things that you can put in probably like over a dozen different ways, and you just have to find which way works best for you. From there, I could go on, try it on, and focus on the hem. I didn't need to take this up too much because I was good about taking it up in the pattern earlier on. So all I'm really doing here first is I am putting in just some finishing like seam stitches by folding it over a 1/4 of an inch. And from there, I then put in some basting stitches, and now I am easing this up and pressing it down to be a 2.5 inch wide hem. And I put these basting stitches in and do this gathering, or I guess easing technique. I found this off of a pattern probably from the 40s, and I really like this method for getting smooth hems on a slightly curved hem. Curved hems can be kind of hard to ease in, and this is the way that definitely works best for me. From there, I'm gonna hand sew or slip stitch this hem and work on a lot of the other finishing details, like putting some fray check in my buttonholes before opening them up, stitching in my little tag, my handmade by Haylee Marie vintage and spooky, because even though she just watches, she is a integral part of the process. And then my last step was taking a lot of very, very tedious feeling hours to stitch this flower trim around the hem. I probably should have skipped this, but I think it was the perfect last touch on the dress, even though it was not great for my like body or physical comfort. But I think it really helped make the look, and I'm absolutely glad I did it. And with that, we are all ready for me to show you what this looks like in the reveal. All right, you've seen the reveal on this one. I hope you enjoyed it. I definitely enjoyed filming the reveal on this one and just honestly really enjoyed this garment. But before I get too much into how much I love this project, I first want to dive into our cost breakdown, which I have right here. So for the fabric, I don't know why I got so announcy. I spent $54.79. This was a cotton linen blend. I bought it at Style Maker. I think they still have it on their site, so I will link that. You can find this on a lot of small shops sites. I think it's a really, really nice material and I enjoyed working with it. And then as far as notions, we had zippers, we had trim, we had labels, we had interfacing, and also some seam binding. So we used quite a variety of notions, which was a total of $14.04. The trim I picked up at an estate sale for super cheap. Otherwise, we'd be looking at something much more expensive with that trim. And then the pattern, I don't know how the pattern was this cheap, but the pattern was only $4.85. This is my first time using it. My bet is it's one of those that like I kept an eye out on either eBay or Etsy and snatched up when I saw the price. Because yeah, it doesn't even make sense to me how it was so cheap, or I found it like at an antique shop. I don't know, but it was cheap and I'm more than happy with that. And that brings us to a grand supply total of $73.68 for how beautiful this dress is, how much wear I'll get out of it, how comfortable it is, and just overall it being beautiful and perfect. I'm happy with that price. I think $73 is great. That is cheaper than some of the dresses at Zara, and those dresses are crap. I'm more than happy with this. And then for labor hours, because we do talk about labor on this channel, because even though this is something I do for fun as a hobby, it did involve labor. That meant that I couldn't be doing a job where I would get paid. You could say I'm getting paid by YouTube, but last year my expenses to cost ratio left me at negative 82 cents an hour. But yeah, the cutting of this took an hour and a half. Sewing took about 6 hours and 45 minutes. This is like machine sewing and ironing and all that good stuff. And then the hand sewing on this took another 6 hours and 45 minutes. It's just because the trim took a while. I had to go all the way around the hem. Also, I was in pretty severe pain from some of my chronic conditions while doing this, so I was also pretty slow. I would guess if I was feeling 100%, it would have taken me a lot quicker. But that brings us to a grand total of hours of 15 hours spent on this dress. This is pretty high for what I would call like a fairly basic sewing project, but just with all the details and the trim and all of that, it got up to 15 hours. And here on this channel, we always talk about a living wage. So I like to talk about what it would take for me to recoup the cost of this garment as far as making it, and then also like the supplies and all of that, like talking for real about what it would take for me to make a living wage doing this. This is just to reframe maybe the way we think about the cheapness of clothing. In general, it's said somewhere between 1 and 3% of the final garment price actually makes it back to the workers who sew it, which when you're talking about a $20 dress is deeply alarming. No matter what sort of like factory line you have a dress, you cannot sustainably and well pay your workers if you are paying them 20 cents for each full garment they're making, even if it's factory line or anything like that. So without the labor total for this was $530.85, which would put the grand total for this at $604.53. When you like start to look comparison of how things cost when you bought less clothes or they were more bespoke and you maybe spent more money on tailoring, this is not like a crazy amount to spend on a garment. Today, it feels really wild to spend that much on a garment because we don't keep our clothes as long. In general, our clothes aren't high quality enough to stick around this long. However, this dress, I can tell you, is very high quality and will outlive me, not because of the fibers, since it is linen and cotton, but because I put really, really a lot of care into making sure that this dress was high quality, good sewing, and would last for years and years and washes to come. But as always, I do try to do a fast fashion comparison. So I scoured the internet for dresses. In general, people don't seem to really sew vertical pintucks anymore with a collar fashion. I just had a really hard time finding any matches for dresses like this across any site. So for the fast fashion dress, the closest dress I found, which didn't have nearly half the details this dress had, was $23 and was made up of polyester. The mid-level, which I was able to actually find something that very closely mimicked the bib detail, but it doesn't have a full skirt, so it used significantly less yardage. But I found something relatively close for $89, and this was a rayon nylon blend. And I do want to note that $89 mid-range price, actually my price for me making this with my own supplies, beat out that $89. I just like to call that out when it happens because sewing with like brand new bought high quality materials isn't always cheaper. In fact, it's never almost cheaper than fast fashion. However, often you can beat these mid-level prices of things that are made of like stuff like rayon or polyester and make something that is around the same price that is made of cotton, really high quality and really great fit. And then for the slow fashion, I found something at $229 that was made out of linen. It did not have pintucks, but it did have a lot of the same shirtwaist details. So that was just kind of like my best approximating. I'm not gonna lie, I spent way too much time like scrolling these fast fashion sites trying to find anything that was close, and even my tried and true like slow fashion bookmarks, I couldn't really find anything along the lines. So these are again estimations. But with that, we're wrapping up the price breakdown, and we can now talk about the dress, which is here. So I wore this to work just the other day. I did find, so for the reveal, I buttoned it all the way up. I found that way too restrictive. So when I actually wore this to work, I left the top button open, and I think it looked just fine. So that was great. And then other than the collar feeling too tight, which again, I fixed, this dress felt really, really, really like comfortable and perfect. This is a dress that is the type of dress that when I put on, I don't think about it at all. I got to the end of the day and I was like, oh, I forgot that I was like trying this dress for the first time and seeing what it felt like to walk around and wear it. So that is the best sign you can ask for, because that means it was really, really, really comfortable. So I love that. The waistband is probably a little tight, but ultimately I didn't notice that much as I was wearing it throughout the day. And I feel like one of the telltale signs that something is a pretty good fit is when you have worn it and you don't get any of those wrinkles from where there's like too many pressure, especially around that waistline. So I'm really, really happy with the fit of this, and I feel really, really, really good in this dress. And I will definitely be making more dresses like this. I love the kind of two-piece element when it's really just one piece. I feel really good in this. As far as like sewing critique, I don't know that I feel like I could do anything that much more fantastic. It's so funny because that pintuck front that I did, when I first started sewing, that was really intimidating, but the older and wiser I get, the more easy I realize pintucks are. And pintucks are crazy easy for how much they add detail-wise to a garment. So that's always really exciting. I will say, I think I need to be really, really, really careful about my hand sewing activity. I don't know if it's the next few months or however long. The amount of pain I was in is not sustainable or good or something I advocate for others, so I shouldn't be doing it to myself. Taking it back to positive, I do really adore this dress. I feel really good in this dress, and this is the type of dress that I've made, and I feel like I could go like to an interview and not have to think but look really put together and also look like me. Like I feel like this is the perfect amount of professional and like whimsy put together. When I recently did a sewing video where I showed the things I sewed off camera, I sewed up this suit that my idea was kind of it was going to be my interview set, but once I finished it, I found that I didn't feel quite me enough in it. It was maybe a touch too professional, and I find that this, I feel like, gives me that professional vibe that I want without it not feeling like me anymore. So I really love that. And also there's something about the way the very, very early 50s does a like gathered skirt that is perfect for me. I really like this skirt because it's not the fluffiest skirt you've ever seen, but it has enough gathering and enough poof that I really like wearing it, but not so much poof that I find it really annoying. So that's a good tidbit, and I adore this trim. I don't know, I really, really love this dress, and even though it wasn't always the most pleasant for me to work on, it was very much a labor of love, and I can see this being one of my favorite go-tos for a very, very long time. And that wraps us up for this video. I hope you enjoyed. Be sure to check out all the other people using hashtag shirtwaistseptember in the playlist I have below. Thank you again so much for Ashley and Serena for getting us all together for this challenge. I personally love the shirtwaist I came out of this with. I think it'll be a lot of fun to see what other ideas people have. As always, to support my channel, you can comment down below, give us a thumbs up, share with a friend, and then of course, if you feel the desire, you can join my Patreon or Ko-Fi for a monthly membership. This just helps support my channel. As of right now, I make negative money on it, so it would be really great to get up there in the positive. Go check out all those other videos in the playlist, and I will see you next week on Friday at 8 a.m. Pacific time. Bye!